What did dinner smell like in your childhood home? For many families in the 1970s, it was the aroma of hamburger browning in a skillet, stretched, seasoned, and turned into pure comfort food. These budget-friendly beef dishes weren't fancy, but they filled plates, warmed hearts, and brought everyone to the table. Today, we're bringing back 25 ground beef recipes that quietly disappeared from American tables. Which of these do you remember tasting or smelling in your childhood kitchen? Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. Back in the early 1970s, when inflation hit hard and beef prices spiked by nearly 30%, families had to stretch every ounce of ground hamburger. Hamburger gravy became a quiet hero of the dinner table. Your mom or grandma would brown a pound of ground beef in a cast iron skillet, letting the fat render out. Then, using that same precious fat, she'd stir in flour to build a roux, adding milk slowly until it thickened into a rich, peppery gravy with tiny bits of hamburger floating throughout. Instead of serving steaks or big chunks of meat, this gravy was ladled generously over a mountain of buttery mashed potatoes. The potatoes acted like a sponge, absorbing every drop of that savory warmth. For a meal that cost under $1.30 total in 1973, you could feed 5 or even 6 hungry mouths. This wasn't poor food, it was survival made comforting. It was your mom turning scarcity into warmth, stress into nourishment. Did your family ever make hamburger gravy? Or maybe you had a different version of this. Tell me how your house did it in the comments. American goulash / American chop suey. American goulash, sometimes called American chop suey, was the unofficial weeknight miracle of the 1970s. It started with a simple foundation, browning ground beef with onions until everything melted together. Then came elbow macaroni, canned tomatoes, maybe a handful of green peppers or corn if the fridge had any left. It all simmered together in one pan, the pasta soaking up those beefy juices like a hungry kid after school. This dish had an adaptability that made it beloved. You didn't need the exact ingredients. If payday was far away, you used more pasta and less beef. If times were slightly better, you sprinkled a little shredded cheese on top at the end for a golden finish. A pound of ground beef, which cost around 89 cents in 1974, could turn into a pot that fed an entire family. This was the taste of coming home from school, tossing your books down and knowing dinner would be ready soon. Beef and macaroni skillet, pre-hamburger helper. Before boxed hamburger helper hit shelves in 1971, families were already making the original homemade helper in their skillet. Moms across America would brown hamburger in their trusty skillet, add elbow macaroni straight to the pan, then pour in water or beef bouillon dissolved in hot water. As it simmered, the macaroni cooked right in that liquid, absorbing every molecule of beefy flavor. Garlic powder or onion flakes gave seasoning. Fresh garlic was still considered gourmet in most suburban kitchens back then. Some families added ketchup, others used tomato sauce, depending on what the pantry had. Once the macaroni softened, a handful of shredded cheddar was stirred in, creating silky, melt-through pockets of cheese. This entire meal took just about 20 minutes from start to finish. For moms who were juggling part-time jobs, laundry, and maybe even night classes at the community college, this meal was a lifesaver. 1 pound of hamburger could feed 6 kids without complaint. Do you remember seeing your mom cook everything in one skillet like this? Beef and cabbage skillet. Cabbage was the budget-saver vegetable of the 1970s. Sometimes as cheap as 12 or 15 cents a pound. When meat was expensive, cabbage did the heavy lifting. Moms would start by browning a bit of hamburger, maybe even less than a full pound, with onions for flavor. Then came the cabbage, sliced thick into wedges or shreds. As it cooked down, it soaked up the beef drippings, turning soft, sweet, and incredibly satisfying. A splash of Worcestershire sauce added depth, and sometimes a can of tomatoes was stirred in if the pantry allowed. The smell of cabbage steaming in beef fat filled the kitchen like a working-class aroma of comfort. Sometimes this dish was served with plain buttered white bread, because bread stretched the meal even further. For families living paycheck to paycheck, this wasn't just cooking, it was strategy, resilience, love. Did you love it? Or did you hold your nose as a kid while it simmered? Tell me honestly below. Hamburger soup / beef vegetable soup. This was the soup that quietly fed families through tight weeks and long winters. Hamburger soup began with browning ground beef in a deep pot, then adding onions, carrots, celery, diced potatoes, maybe even frozen mixed vegetables, those big economy bags that lasted all month. Canned tomatoes or tomato sauce gave acid and color, and everything simmered slowly until the flavors married. Some families used bouillon cubes because actual beef broth was a luxury. Others saved vegetable scraps in the freezer, ends of carrots, celery tops, onion trimmings, and cooked them into the broth for more flavor. A single pound of hamburger could become a soup that lasted 2 or even 3 dinners. On cold nights, dads came home from long commutes and gas lines, kids came home from school, and everyone gathered around steaming bowls that warmed the body and the heart. Tater tot hot dish / tater tot casserole. If you grew up in the Midwest, especially Minnesota, you already know, this wasn't just food. This was community culture. Tater tot hot dish became a potluck superstar in the 1970s. Moms would brown a pound of ground beef, mix it with cream of mushroom soup, maybe 2 cans if they got them on sale for 29 cents each, then spread it into a glass casserole dish. The final step was beautifully ritualistic, carefully lining frozen tater tots across the top in neat, military rows. As it baked, the tots got crispy and golden while underneath formed a creamy, beefy filling. This dish could feed 8 people easily, and because everything was pre-prepped and inexpensive, it became the unofficial meal of PTA meetings, church suppers, family reunions, and funeral luncheons. People didn't ask, will there be hot dish? They asked, how many versions of hot dish will show up today? Shipwreck casserole. This dish earned its name honestly. Shipwreck casserole was born from whatever hadn't gone bad yet in the pantry. In the 1970s, moms stretched meals with creativity, not luxury. They would combine browned ground beef with canned vegetables, maybe corn, green beans, or diced tomatoes, then stir in a can of condensed soup to bind it all together. But the star of this dish was the topping. Crushed potato chips scattered generously over the top before baking. Once baked, the chips on top became crispy and golden, while the ones inside softened and soaked in beefy juices, turning into salty, savory bites of comfort. It was messy, chaotic, improvised, and completely delicious. You didn't need perfect ingredients or gourmet seasoning. You needed resourcefulness and intuition, the kind our mothers and grandmothers had in abundance. Ragmop casserole. Named for its shredded noodle-like appearance, Ragmop casserole was another waste-not classic. In the 1970s, throwing away food was unthinkable. Grandma would save broken spaghetti, half bags of elbow macaroni, leftover egg noodles, anything starch-based, and combine them for this Ragmop mixture. Browned ground beef went in, plus canned tomatoes and a can of mushroom soup to make it creamy. As it baked, the pieces of random pasta softened into each other, creating a comforting, cohesive dish, even though nothing matched in shape or size. The end result looked a bit chaotic, like a tangle of mop strings, but it tasted like pure nostalgia. This was kitchen alchemy, taking scraps and transforming them into something filling and familiar. Corn chip beef bake. Sometimes the best recipes happen by accident. Like when a bag of corn chips went stale and somebody thought, wait, let's bake them. Corn chip beef bake mixed brown ground beef with canned beans, corn, and tomatoes, giving it a Tex-Mex vibe long before most Americans had ever eaten real Mexican food. But the magic happened with the topping, a thick blanket of crushed corn chips sprinkled generously with cheese. In the oven, the chips crisped into a golden crust, salty, slightly smoky, with that unmistakable corn crunch. Beneath that lay a warm, hearty mixture with just enough spice to feel adventurous, but still mild enough to keep picky kids happy. Families served it with shredded lettuce or diced tomatoes on top to stretch it even further. Some added sour cream if they were feeling fancy, or if it was payday week. Have you ever had a casserole with corn chips baked into it? And be honest, did you fight over the crunchy top? Because in many families, that part caused real sibling battles. Beef and potato hash casserole. Breakfast for dinner was more common than people today realize. In the cash-tight 1970s, moms often turned breakfast ingredients into evening meals, and beef and potato hash casserole was a perfect example. They would combine ground beef with frozen hash browns, those 5-pound economy bags that lasted for weeks. Then came a mix of cream of celery or mushroom soup, sour cream for richness if available, and shredded cheese. For crunch, some cooks used crushed cornflakes on top, others used breadcrumbs, and some went with nothing at all, letting the potatoes form a crispy lid. Inside, everything baked into a creamy, savory, satisfying blend of carbs and protein. This meal had one huge advantage: it was filling. After a long day of working overtime, parent-teacher conferences, mowing lawns, or shoveling snow, a plate of this casserole felt like fuel. Salisbury steak. Salisbury steak was the closest many 1970s families ever got to a real steak dinner. Instead of tender beef cuts, moms transformed ground hamburger into oval patties mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, milk, and onion. These patties were shaped to look like cuts of steak, then seared in a skillet until browned and crisp on the outside. But the real magic came afterward. when the patties were removed and the same pan was used to caramelize onions and whisk together a rich brown gravy using the leftover meat drippings. This gravy, silky and savory, was poured over the patties before serving, turning humble hamburger into something that felt luxurious. In 1975, a single pound of ground beef could be purchased for under $1 and stretched into 6 Salisbury steaks. Paired with mashed potatoes or buttered noodles, the meal looked impressive, the kind of dinner you'd make when grandparents were visiting or when celebrating a birthday on a tight budget. Kids growing up in that era often truly believed they were eating steak, and even when they learned the truth later, the memory didn't lose its shine. Mock prime rib patties. There was something magical about the phrase prime rib in the 1970s. It spoke of elegance and expense. But most families couldn't afford real prime rib, especially during the middle of the decade's economic slump. So cooks created mock prime rib patties, thick, rustic hamburger rounds mixed with breadcrumbs, Worcestershire sauce, and liquid smoke. That bottled smoke was a prized secret ingredient, bringing the illusion of slow-smoked flavor right into suburban kitchens. These patties were browned deeply in a skillet to build an outer crust, then topped with a sauce made from cream of mushroom soup thinned with red wine or beef broth, creating a silky coating that mimicked restaurant-style presentation. Served on a real plate rather than in a bun, flanked by canned asparagus or baked potatoes, these patties felt like fine dining. The brilliance of this dish wasn't in fooling anyone. It was in preserving dignity. Families might not have had fancy food, but they could still create event meals, dishes that made ordinary nights feel like celebrations. Midwest meat pie. In small-town America, especially across the Midwest, the meat pie was a masterclass in practicality disguised as generosity. Families would cook ground beef with onions, potatoes, carrots, and whatever root vegetables were available. This hearty mixture was spooned into a homemade pie crust, or, for busy parents, a store-bought one when Pillsbury crusts went on sale. A top crust sealed in the juices, and the pie baked until golden and fragrant, filling the house with the smell of warm pastry and seasoned meat. Once cooled slightly, the pie was sliced into wedges, each slice becoming a self-contained meal. Carbs, meat, vegetables, all in one tidy triangle. A single pie could feed a family for 2 nights, and leftovers reheated beautifully. During the 1970s, this meal became popular for weeknights when mom needed something that could cook while she folded laundry or helped with homework. Most kids didn't realize this was a stretch meal. They just remembered the flaky crust and savory filling. Do you remember eating this with ketchup? Or was that strictly forbidden in your household? Beef and biscuit ring. This was one of the most visually impressive dishes of the era, the kind designed to make guests raise an eyebrow in admiration. To make it, moms would brown ground beef with onions and spices, maybe adding corn or green beans for color and volume. Meanwhile, refrigerated biscuit dough, the kind that popped from a cardboard tube, was arranged in an overlapping ring on a baking sheet. The beef mixture was poured into the center, and the biscuit flaps were folded partially over it, creating a rustic, crown-like presentation. As it baked, the biscuits puffed into golden crescents that framed the savory center, absorbing just enough of the beef juices to develop flavor while still staying fluffy. When placed on the table, this dish looked like something from a mid-century home magazine, but in truth, it was a 15-minute assembly followed by hands-off baking. It was perfect for company dinners when one wanted to impress without spending a fortune. Beef and potato casserole. Grandma's version. This dish didn't chase trends or fad diets. It was pure, unapologetic comfort food. In a casserole dish, moms layered thin slices of potatoes with seasoned ground beef, sprinkling in onions and perhaps a little cream of celery or mushroom soup. Sometimes, they'd pour a dash of milk over the layers to create creamy cohesion during baking. At the very end, shredded cheddar or American cheese was scattered across the top, melting into a golden, bubbly crust. What made this special was its simplicity. No ancient grains, no organic avocado oil, no gluten-free dairy alternatives, just beef, potatoes, cheese, and a mother's instinct for nourishment. For families navigating layoffs, rising fuel costs, and soaring grocery prices, this casserole meant security. There would be enough for seconds, and probably enough for tomorrow's lunch, too. For many kids, the memory of digging through that soft, cheesy top layer into the savory meat below still triggers a kind of emotional warmth. Beef enchilada casserole. In the 1970s, most American families didn't know authentic Mexican cuisine, but they thought they did. Beef enchilada casserole was the suburban interpretation of enchiladas, messy, layered, and easy. Mom's browned ground beef with a packet of taco seasoning, one of the decade's trendiest pantry shortcuts. Then they stirred in canned enchilada sauce, mild, never too spicy, and began layering strips of corn tortillas in a casserole dish like noodle sheets. Between those layers went the beef mixture, refried beans, and shredded cheese. As it baked, the tortillas softened into something almost pasta-like, while the cheese melted into a gooey blanket of comfort. This version avoided the hassle of individually stuffing and rolling enchiladas, and it fed a crowd for under $4 in 1978. Kids who had never heard the word enchilada before suddenly declared it their favorite food. And for many, this casserole was their first introduction to what they believed was Mexican cooking. Beef and bean burrito bake. This casserole was basically burritos, collapsed into a baking dish. The ground beef cooked with taco seasoning formed the base flavor, and canned pinto beans or refried beans were added to bulk it up. Some families even mixed in leftover rice when they needed to stretch a pound of beef further. Instead of rolling individual burritos, which was time-consuming, moms layered everything like lasagna. Tortillas, beef and bean mixture, cheese, repeat. Once baked, the layers fused together into a cohesive, hearty slab that could be sliced cleanly into squares. Each slice looking like a burrito turned into a casserole. On top, some families added shredded lettuce, tomatoes, sour cream, or black olives, making it look fancy without costing extra. Did your family ever hack burritos into a casserole like this? Beef tamale pie, cornbread version. This was the version that felt closest to Tex-Mex inspiration, filtered through 1970s convenience culture. Moms browned ground beef with onions and chili powder, stirred in canned corn and olives, then spread the mixture into a baking dish. But the real identity of tamale pie came from the topping. A layer of cornbread batter poured over the entire dish, forming a golden crust as it baked. This topping hid the meat mixture beneath it like a rustic blanket. When sliced, the cornbread layer revealed the savory beef, giving each bite that mix of sweet corn flavor with mild spice. It wasn't authentic Mexican cuisine, but it was soulful, filling, and familiar. In many homes, this was considered an adventure dinner, something exotic but still safe enough for picky kids. And for families without access to specialty ingredients, cornbread was affordable and beloved. Beef stuffed peppers, 1970s version. Stuffed peppers existed long before the 1970s, but ground beef turned them into a practical weeknight dinner. The bell peppers were sliced in half, lengthwise or across depending on family tradition, then parboiled to soften them. The filling was a thrifty miracle, ground beef mixed with tomato sauce, onion, and rice, often minute rice because it cooked faster and cost less energy. Moms would scoop the filling generously into each pepper half, then bake them until the peppers softened further and the filling bubbled at the edges. The final touch, always, was cheese melted on top. Sometimes mozzarella, sometimes cheddar, sometimes just processed slices because that was what was on hand. What made them special was the individual serving size presentation. Every person got their own pepper, their own portion. It felt personal. It felt intentional. Were you a stuffed pepper kid? Or did you push the peppers aside and only eat the filling? Cabbage rolls with ground beef. Brought from Eastern European immigrant kitchens into mainstream America, cabbage rolls became a hearty, inexpensive comfort meal. The tough outer leaves of cabbage were softened in boiling water, then rolled around a mixture of ground beef, onions, tomato sauce, and rice. During tight weeks, the filling might be mostly rice with a hint of beef. Families knew how to stretch what they had. The rolls simmered slowly in tomato sauce, either on the stove or in the oven, allowing the flavors to mingle until the cabbage turned silky and tender, almost sweet. The acidic tomato sauce balanced the richness of the meat, creating a dish that felt both humble and celebratory. Some families made dozens at a time, freezing extra rolls for later, ensuring future dinners were just a reheat away. Hamburger soup. Hamburger soup was the unofficial snow day food of the 1970s. Warm, hearty, comforting, and able to feed a big family with just a pound of ground beef. Mom browned the beef with onions, then tossed in chopped carrots, celery, potatoes, and sometimes barley or small pasta. A can of tomatoes or a splash of tomato sauce gave the broth a rich red depth. Everything simmered together until the flavors melted into one another, the vegetables turning soft, the broth beefy and fragrant. On a cold winter day, the smell of hamburger soup bubbling on the stove was enough to make kids come inside and peel off their wet mittens. It wasn't fancy. There were no artisan broths or farm-to-table vegetables, just simple ingredients and slow, simmering magic. By the next day, the leftovers tasted even better as the broth thickened and the flavors deepened. For many, this soup was love in a bowl, ladled into chipped ceramic mugs, eaten with crackers or buttered toast. Beef, chili. In the 1970s, chili wasn't a contest or a gourmet event. It was a weeknight dinner that fed a family cheaply and deliciously. Ground beef cooked down with onions, kidney beans, canned tomatoes, and chili powder. Nothing complicated, nothing extravagant. The beans were key. They stretched the beef, added texture, and made the pot last longer. In Texas households, chili sometimes had no beans at all, staying true to its roots. But across the rest of America, beans were economical and expected. The chili simmered for hours, filling the house with that warm, spicy smell that signaled dinner was coming. A bowl of chili warmed you from the inside, especially on frigid evenings in homes where the thermostat was kept low to save on heating oil. Parents loved it because one pot could feed 8 people for under $3. Kids loved it because they could sprinkle cheese on top, add saltines, or crumble cornbread into it. Beef and potato hash skillet. This dish was a celebration of leftovers, the kitchen equivalent of turning scraps into gold. Moms would brown ground beef in a skillet, then add diced potatoes, onions, maybe bell peppers or carrots, whatever needed using. The potatoes would crisp in the beef drippings, taking on savory flavor, while the meat melded with the vegetables into a hearty mash. Sometimes a splash of Worcestershire sauce or ketchup was stirred in near the end, giving a tangy, slightly sweet finish. In many homes, this dish was topped with a fried egg, letting the yolk run over the hash like a golden gravy. It was budget cooking at its best, comforting, rustic, and deeply satisfying. Beef and potato hash wasn't flashy, but it was the kind of food that made families linger around the table instead of rushing away. Did your parents ever make this? Beef stroganoff, Hamburger style. Beef stroganoff may have Russian origins, but in the 1970s America, it was reinvented as a weeknight dinner using ground beef instead of steak. Families browned hamburger with onions, then stirred in cream of mushroom soup and a splash of milk or sour cream to make a rich, velvety sauce. The mixture was spooned over egg noodles or rice, creating a dish that felt fancy, even though it cost just pennies per serving. The ground beef version became hugely popular because steak was too expensive for most households, especially during the inflation and fuel crisis of 1974 to 75. But the flavor of the creamy gravy with tender noodles was comforting and deeply satisfying, no matter the cut of meat. Some families added mushrooms if they could afford them. Others simply relied on the can of condensed soup to bring the taste. This was the kind of meal that made kids lick their plates clean and ask for seconds. A taste of special occasion cooking on an ordinary Wednesday night. Corn chip beef bake. If you were a kid in the 1970s, this casserole probably felt like a party on a plate. It began with ground beef seasoned with chili powder or taco seasoning, mixed with canned tomatoes, corn, or beans. But the real star? The topping. A layer of crushed corn chips that formed a crunchy crust as it baked. Underneath, the beef mixture stayed juicy and soft. On top, the chips stayed crisp and salty. Cheese was usually sprinkled over everything, melting into a bubbly, golden blanket. This was fun food, the kind parents made on Friday nights or when cousins came over. It wasn't health food, it wasn't fancy. It was pure pleasure. Salty, cheesy, beefy goodness. Beef stew, ground beef adaptation. Before slow cookers were common, and before families could afford stew meat regularly, many moms in the 1970s made a humble version of beef stew using ground hamburger instead of big chunks of beef. They'd start by browning ground beef with onions in a deep pot, letting that familiar scent fill the kitchen. Then came chopped potatoes, carrots, celery, and canned tomatoes, simple ingredients that softened slowly in the pot, soaking in every bit of beefy flavor. A few cups of broth, or just water with bouillon cubes, created a fragrant, soup-like base. Unlike traditional stew that took hours with tougher cuts of beef, this hamburger stew cooked in less than 45 minutes, saving both time and fuel costs. And it was affordable. In 1976, a pound of ground beef cost around 85 to 99 cents, while stew meat could be more than double that. So families learned to adapt, and this lighter, quicker stew became a winter staple. Served with warm bread or saltine crackers, it was the kind of dinner that made everyone feel cared for, even on lean weeks. Beef cottage pie, shepherd's pie with ground beef. In many American homes of the 1970s, shepherd's pie quietly transformed into what families called cottage pie, because real lamb was expensive, but ground beef was affordable. Moms browned hamburger with onions and mixed in canned vegetables, usually peas, corn, and carrots, then stirred in gravy or tomato sauce to bind everything into a savory filling. This went into a deep dish as the foundation. Then came the best part, a layer of mashed potatoes spread lovingly across the top. Some families made real mashed potatoes from scratch, while others used instant flakes, and nobody complained. The top was often decorated with fork tines, making ridges that would turn beautifully golden in the oven. A little butter or cheese sprinkled on top added richness as it baked, filling the house with that unmistakably cozy aroma. When served, each spoonful went through soft potato into beefy filling, the ultimate comfort combination. This was the meal that could stretch a single pound of ground beef to feed 6 or even 8 people. Beef and tomato skillet / country beef and rice skillet. This dish was basically the homemade, heartier, real food version of Hamburger Helper before the boxed mix took over American kitchens. Moms across the country browned ground beef in a skillet with onions and garlic powder, then stirred in canned diced tomatoes or tomato sauce. The acidity of the tomatoes balanced perfectly with the richness of the beef, creating a savory, slightly tangy base. Then came the rice, usually white rice or minute rice because it cooked faster and stretched the meal further. As it simmered, the rice absorbed the tomato beef juices and swelled into a soft, comforting mixture full of flavor. Sometimes, a handful of frozen peas or corn went in for color and extra volume. A little Worcestershire or soy sauce wasn't uncommon either. Small tricks to deepen the taste without extra cost. By 1978, rice cost about 20 cents a pound and ground beef under $1, meaning this skillet meal could feed a family of 5 for less than $2 total. It wasn't fancy, but it smelled like dinner long before you reached the...
In an era of rising prices and long commutes, this was the kind of meal that stretched modest ingredients into security. The edible reassurance that no matter how loud the world outside got, dinner would be waiting.
Thank you for stepping back in time with us today. If you enjoyed preserving these forgotten food traditions and stories of everyday American life, hit subscribe and join us here on Back to Yesterday, where history isn't distant, it's personal. We'll see you in the next video.